Half a day. I'm Dawn Lees Regis, and welcome to this virtual exhibit, Guam Textures, A Journey Through Abstraction. The physical exhibit was installed at Castro Gallery at the Tumon Sands Plaza, Guam, from November 7 to 28, 2020. Although abstraction has been a part of my approach to art for many years, I determined a review of the history of Western abstraction would further ground and strengthen my work. This was accomplished by an academic review of the history of Western abstraction and through the application of techniques used by the 20th century artists. This process gave me the opportunity to focus on the beauty of Guam from a more intimate viewpoint. My creative efforts were spent noticing and appreciating the beautiful textures in nature, such as the way water sculpts the sand, the various colors and shapes of Guam dirt, the way roots push through the soil and sit quietly with tree droppings, and the wet gooiness of a footprint in mud. In this exhibit, my intention is to share with you what I learned from a variety of modern artists as they led me through the various 20th century movements, from Symbolism to Cubism to Postmodernism. You will see how I applied the teachings of artists such as Odilon Rodin, Pablo Picasso, and Helen Frankenthaler, just to name a few, to the pieces presented in this exhibit. I believe my work is much stronger now for having completed this journey, and I sincerely hope you enjoy the show. My paintings were supported in part by a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, Guam Council on the Arts and Humanities Agency, a division of the Department of Chamorro Affairs, Government of Guam, and the Office of the Governor. For Les Danseuses, I was inspired by the pago leaves you see in this source photo, which had been burned by salt air and were dancing in the wind. I applied Odilon Rodin's use of hybrid creatures by turning the leaves into ballerinas and using the dying pago buds for their heads. This piece is done in the same manner as his predominantly black artworks referred to as noirs, for which Smiling Spider is an example. Odilon Rodin was the leading artist of the French Symbolist movement and was influenced by different religions and philosophies. The great power of nature, I think, is the way she unselfishly presents her beauty and mystery to us. Even in death, there is beauty. The natural mystery of the pago flower is that it blooms, changes color a few times, and dies all in one day. Inspired by the image of a dying pago blossom, and while looking at Rodin's strange flower, I attempted to apply a mystical sensibility to this piece called Fleur Mystique. For Nedzuk, I wanted to develop a complex layering of images that mixed human, plant, and animal in the way that Susan Sidon Boulay has done in most of her mature work. Amazonas is just one example of her unique style. Inspired by the mask-like shape of the palm frond you see in the source photo, in Nedzuk I present a being that has a clear connection to the coconut tree and also her wild self, as represented by the wolf elements in the painting. The Guam textures inspiration for my painting titled Tree Roots are ironwood trees found at the base of Tarzan Falls. Looking at the work of Andre Duran, I think you can see how I applied Fauvist techniques by choosing bright colors that are not part of the natural world of tree roots, and by using loose brushstrokes. I enjoyed the free-flowing sensibility of the roots themselves and tried to express that idea in the composition. Analytical Cubism was a short but highly influential movement occurring between 1910 and 1912, which presents objects from multiple viewpoints to convey a physical and psychological sense of the fluidity of consciousness. For my piece, titled Pung Lao, I was inspired by a land crab I saw in the boonies. Looking at the painting La Femme au Cheval, I broke up the image of the land crab into geometric shapes, with some organic shapes included, and used a similar color palette in the manner of Jean Messenger. Synthetic Cubism was developed between 1912 and 1920 and remained a vital movement until Surrealism gained popularity. Compared to Analytical Cubism, Synthetic Cubism was more detail-oriented and focused more on texture, color, and shapes to build new images. In keeping with the concept of building new images and following the example of Man with a Pipe by Pablo Picasso, I did a line drawing of the photo of Langasat buds, cut it apart into shapes, and reconstructed the pieces into a new composition. Synthetic Cubist pieces often include collage elements, which I also did using rubbings from trees and leaves, and I included a real Langasat leaf that had been chewed on by insects into the composition. Spirit Guide 3 is influenced by surrealist artist Merritt Oppenheim's most famous work, Object. The aim of surrealism is to allow the unconscious the freedom to express itself and is best known for associations with the dream state, illogical scenes, and creatures created from random objects. Based on a carabao footprint in the mud, Spirit Guide 3 is a reference to our deep attachment to Mother Earth, despite how transient our existence may be. I was attracted to biomorphic abstraction because of the use of rounded forms based on those found in nature. Sandscape is a paper collage that represents the shapes made in the sand by receding water in the same free-flowing and organic manner seen in Wassily Kandinsky's painting titled Complex Simple. For Sandscape, I was thinking about Kandinsky's color theories on how color and shape affect human emotions. As I developed my composition, I wanted to express happy and stimulated emotions, which are feelings I often associate with being on the beach. Toward the end of his career, Henri Matisse used his father's tailoring shears and some pre-painted sheets of paper to cut shapes to make his playful cutout compositions. Creole Dancer is one example of this work. Combining the images of the squid and the ruffled clam and following the example of Henri Matisse in his work called Creole Dancer, I created my fabric construction piece titled Jewels of the Sea. Using fabrics that had some special significance to me, I stuffed the pieces for the squid forms, as quilters might do, and used beads as decorative elements to create a composition about how soft and hard surfaces commingle in the ocean. I love the fluid shapes, abstract masses, and lyrical gestures of Helen Frankenthaler's expressionistic pieces. Looking at her work Before the Caves, I was inspired to apply her approach to the reflected images in the freshwater pool you see in the source photo. To paint in this manner, a person must be willing to let go of any preconceived outcome and work in the moment. If you are willing to accept the likelihood of multiple disasters prior to obtaining something unexpected and beautiful, you will be rewarded, and I believe I was in this silk painting reflecting pool. Black water is a piece that developed as a result of a trance-like dream state that was induced by the meditative practice of deep breathing. Although a somewhat more controlled process occurred in this assemblage of torn paper and fur, the randomness of the tearing and placement of pieces make this an expressionistic piece. The soft edges and deep turquoise are elements inspired by Helen Frankenthaler's painting Blue Territory, and also how reflections bounce off clear water. I faced a few challenges in this painting, Coconut Tree Trunk. The first being my reluctance to indulge in unpainterly paintings. I happen to really like brush strokes, squishy paint, and complicated shapes. The second challenge was finding a Guam texture subject that I wanted to paint in a style that eliminates all texture. And lastly, the execution. Not so easy to paint such hard, flat shapes. Post-painterly abstraction is a brutally factual kind of art that focuses solely on the basic elements of art, rejecting the inwardness and mysticism of abstract expressionism. While walking my dog at the University of Guam, I came across this amazing dao tree with complex roots pushing up through the earth, looking very strong, yet willing to sit quietly with all the debris dropped from the tree. And I especially liked the very feminine-looking figure that appeared in this root grouping. For this piece, I worked with a bright acrylic wash for an underpainting and then used layers and layers of pastels to achieve a dense yet luminous color palette in the manner of Rufino Tamayo. This piece is one of my favorites of the series. For Alternate Universe, I was looking at the print by Nancy Graves called Vertigo. Her print was influenced by images of space. My work is influenced by the small mounds that crabs make in the sandy part of the reef. I thought the comparison was pretty cool since Nancy Graves' piece was about other worlds in a giant outer space, and my piece is about a smaller, but no less significant, world that is made by tiny creatures. For the next three pieces, I'm out on my own, not looking at any artist specifically, but still inspired by the beautiful textures of Guam. Seaweeds 2 is, in my opinion, abstract expressionist in nature, but more controlled in execution. I spent time looking at the source photo and trying to get a psychic understanding about how those seaweeds feel as the water moves in and out and around, pushing the seaweeds this way and that. There's some controlled energy there that seemed important for me to express. I find great satisfaction in my work when it's grounded in natural forms. For morning lights, my intention was to focus primarily on the light that was bouncing off of the wet sand and really feel the energy of the water, the pulling and sucking of the tide that would make those strong shapes in the sand. I feel the strength of this piece is not only supported by forms in nature, but also by a willingness to let the work develop the way it wants to. I think that presenting the source photo with this piece gives insight into how a work can and does develop in its own way if you're willing to allow the process to happen without judgment. Morning Lights 2 was inspired by the beautiful colors and shapes found in Guam dirt after a rainstorm. While looking at the source photo, I could get a feel of how fast the water was rushing down the hill and how it pulled the dirt with it. The colors and shapes seemed so soft to me, even after such violence. It was the softness that I wanted to emphasize in this painting, and so I purposely left out the grainy pebbles you can see in the source photo. These are two small companion pieces for the Guam Textures series and were fun ways to combine my Western sensibilities to Guam textures. The first is a piece of dried ocean vegetation that I attached to a small slab of Carrara marble left over from a sculpture I completed at another moment in time. The broken slab is embedded in sand, and I love the ornate frame that gives these objects a status that might have gone unnoticed otherwise. The second is a rendering of a cone shell on slate that is surrounded by rabbit fur. This is a nod to Merritt Oppenheim and her famous fur teacup. This piece also carries the idea of dangerous beauty. Cone shells are deadly poisonous, yet here it is, nestled in inviting softness and surrounded by an ornate frame. The next several slides are work done prior to the Guam Textures series that I felt merited a showing next to the newer works. It gives the viewer an opportunity to see that I'm no stranger to abstraction, but also to consider the growth that has occurred in my work over the years. The painting shown here was inspired by organic forms that I could see looking down into clear water on a really hot day. The water had a golden sheen to it, and that fascinated me. This painting, called Meili, has no particular story behind it. Once again influenced by formations in the soil, this piece developed on its own. I like to listen to others tell me what they see in the piece. I've heard fish, turtle, bird, running woman, bodhisattva. I'll let you decide. Shell ginger is an abstraction achieved through layering of textures on top of one another. Instead of abstracting the flowers themselves, I changed them by hiding them or burying them under texture obtained by spray painting over various lace fabrics. I was looking at Aboriginal dot paintings at the time and simply applied my own approach. The title of this piece occurred to me after I was finished with it and stood back to look at it. The Hunt is torn paper on canvas. There's no story behind this piece either. I was just having so much fun ripping up tissue paper and gluing it down layer upon layer. Other people have said to me that this looks like the African painting or the animal one. Again, I'll let you decide. This painting is part of a series that I started with the intention of exploring what a goddess is. I wanted to develop some creatures that were fat and furry, that had claws and teeth, that departed as much as possible from the Western image of a goddess. In my imagination, this one is the goddess of the caves and is the reason your skin prickles when you enter, just so you are aware that she is there. This piece is part of a series called Eternal Feminine. I spent quite a few years exploring feminist art and literature, applying what I was absorbing to my own work. There is a feeling of rebirth in this piece with a distinct connection to the feminine aspect of nature. And finally, these are samples of drawings I've done that have led to, or someday will lead to, larger paintings. I feel they express my connection to nature, animal, ocean, and plant being represented here. Thank you very much for attending this virtual exhibit. If you want to see more of my work, you can look at my website, donleesragisart.com, or check out my Facebook page on Don Lees Rages. And if you'd like to know more, I recently completed a project called A Journey Through Abstraction, which is a web-based educational tool designed for high school and 101 university level arts and humanities students who want to know and learn more about the modern art era and abstraction. This product includes a free video and lesson plan for teachers who are looking for alternative approaches to enrich their students' learning experience. You can find these resources on my website or at the YouTube address listed. The Journey Through Abstraction project was made possible by funding from Humanities Guam, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Federal CARES Act.